Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Sela Social Studies. We last covered the 5 themes of geography. I hope you did well on that checkpoint. And today we're going to get moving over into the more of the people aspect of our class. We're going to start with the natives of North and South and Mesoamerica. We need to understand how people got here, what they did when they got here. We have to understand how they lived, what type of cultures they put into place. We have to understand the importance of the natives of our past, of our nation's past. So during the last ice age, between 38,000 and about 10,000 years ago, Paleo Indians migrated across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia to present-day Alaska. This movement of people from one region to another is called migration. The Paleo Indians were able to walk across this land bridge, and after they got here, the ice melted away, which ended the Ice Age, and it also ended the passage between Asia and America. So that's how they were kind of stuck here. The Paleo Indians and their descendants moved into present-day Canada. Then they migrated south to the warmer weather of the United States and Mexico and South and Mesoamerica. Climate affected many early peoples in the Americas. These people mostly lived in small groups and were hunter-gatherers, meaning they went and they would be nomadic. So these early Americans were traveling around mostly on foot from place to place, hunting animals and gathering wild plants and berries to eat. And the warming of this climate of the earth created new environments and climates and landscapes that surrounded these living things. These differing environments influenced the development of Native American societies. These Native American societies were groups of people that shared a common culture. And a culture is a group's common values and traditions. Cultures can be languages, social activities, and religion. These cultures were regional in the country. Much like today, people who live in different areas of the country live and believe in different things. So let's go to the Central and South America. Some of the earliest civilizations migrated south to Mesoamerica and South America. This is where one of the first civilizations, the Olmec, and the famed Aztec and Incan and Mayan empires existed. We call this era in history the Pre-Columbian time. That means it was before the sailing of Christopher Columbus to the New World in 1492. One of the earliest prehistoric peoples to inhabit the Gulf of Mexico region were the Olmec Civilization. They developed around 1200 BC in Mesoamerica. Studies from these archaeological sites show that the Olmecs used rubber, and they were known for using stones in architecture, and they built the first pyramids in the Americas. Their civilization lasted for about 800 years, ending around 400 BC. So let's get into the Maya. The Maya were the Great Neck civilization. They developed after the Olmec, and by 200 AD, they were building large cities with thousands in population. They were known for creating great pyramids, temples, palaces, and bridges. The Maya were also famous for practicing agriculture. They worked with precious metals like gold and silver and used one of the oldest translatable writings called hieroglyphics, which was a series of pictures and shapes. The Great Maya civilization ended around 900 AD. Now we'll get into the Aztec. The Aztec were able to conquer all of central Mexico. In 1325, they founded the capital city Tenochtitlan. This capital city became the greatest city in the Americas and one of the world's largest, with cities in the hundreds of thousands of people living there. A reason for this was their skill in agriculture, which used an elaborate system of irrigation. And by the 1500s, they ruled the most powerful state in Mesoamerica. The Incan. The Inca began as a small tribe in the Andes Mountains in South America. They built their capital city at Cusco, and by the 1500s, the empire stretched along much of the western South American coast, taking up much of the lands in Chile. The Inca were known for a strong central government, their art, road systems, and their skills in agriculture. So all of these native societies grew to an enormous size and thrived for hundreds of years, yet some dissolved without a trace or no evidence to know exactly what happened to them. And there are many different hypotheses about why these civilizations failed. I agree with the scholarly evidence that some civilizations were forced to move because of the events that maybe led to a drought or famine. Some southwestern civilizations in the United States were forced to move because natural events changed the direction of a river and how it flowed, and it dried up, leaving the settlement without any source of drinking water. Other civilizations were completely destroyed later by diseases like smallpox after European exploration. So now let's talk about pre-Columbian societies. The earliest people in North America, which is the United States and Canada, were also hunter-gatherers. They too lived in small populations due to the frequent movement of following animal herds and searching for wild plants to feed off of. Hunting and gathering burned a lot of calories, and calories were hard to find traveling great distances and caring for small herds of animals. If native tribes were going to flourish into major civilizations, they would be required to figure out how to feed a large population. One of the greatest learned activities that affected the early Native Americans the most is around 5000 BC when they learned to farm crops on a large scale. The effect of learning to farm was a population explosion. No longer did natives need to move frequently for fertile lands or follow herds. They could just stay put, grow families, and increase city population size. So let's talk about geography and culture. Native American civilizations are divided into different societies, and these societies are primarily divided by geography and culture. Geographic areas would influence Native American cultures in many ways, and researchers use these culture areas to help describe ancient Native American peoples. North America is divided into several culture areas, including the far north, the Pacific coast, California, west, southwest, Great Plains, and the east. So let's talk about northwest and southwest culture areas. The geography of the northwestern part of the United States influenced some of the Pacific Northwest societies like the Chinook and the Tillamook. These abundant forests up there allowed them to carve images of totems, which were ancestor or animal spirits, on tall wooden poles, and they would hold feasts called potlatches to celebrate the raising of these totems, where food was shared in the people of the society, and they were allowed members of the nation to display their wealth amongst the others. The Northwest geography allowed the indigenous nations to thrive on abundant game animals, fish, and wild plants. On the flip side of that, the southwestern geography of the United States affected the cultures of native societies there. The Anasazi, or the Puebloans, were early farm cultures in the southwest United States. The southwestern climate is dry and hot, and these indigenous people were able to develop irrigation methods to water their crops in the dry heat of the southwest United States. They grew crops like maize, which is corn, or beans and squash to survive. They lived in pueblos, which were above-ground houses made of heavy clay called adobe. Homes were also built on the side of cliffs, where the cliff dwellers kept themselves cool in the shade on the side of the mountain and safe from animals and any dangers below. Some built kivas, which were underground cereal chambers for religious ceremonies. For reasons mostly unknown, they began to abandon their villages around 1300 AD. It is believed that because of the water shortages, many families had to abandon their homes. I took some pictures that I put on my website to show some of the cliff dwellings that I visited while I was in the southwestern part of the United States, so you should check them out. They're pretty cool. We also had the Great Plains and Eastern culture areas. The Great Plains stretched from Canada down to Texas and from the Mississippi Valley all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and it was an abundant amount of land for many native societies to flourish. Societies like the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Crow would hunt the vast grasslands for wild game like buffalo. The Great Plains societies used their buffalo for everything. They would use that buffalo for skins for shields, clothing, coverings for teepees, which were cone-shaped shelters. They would use the bones for utensils. They would use the buffalo for everything in the Great Plains. It was their tool for success. So let's go to the Northeast and the Southeastern native people. In North Carolina, the native societies like the Cherokee, the Lumbee, and the Coharie flourished in a region that was rich in resources and of food and shelter. The forests of western North Carolina provided vast natural resources for building villages. The Piedmont Society made use of the fertile farmlands of the central and eastern part of the state, and they would live in farming villages. In the northeast part of the United States, the Iroquois formed the Iroquois League, which was a confederation that waged war against non-Iroquois people. While there are hundreds of Native American nations or societies across the United States, there are some beliefs that many of them shared. Two prominent beliefs that were shared by most Native Americans were religious beliefs and property beliefs. Many Native societies were polytheistic, which means they believed in many gods, and that religion was linked with nature. They believed in many gods like the sun god, the wind god, and the water god. They believed that spiritual forces were everywhere, even in plants and animals. This is where that idea of spirit animal comes from. And private property, that was not a sign seen hanging in many native societies. That is where today's Americans differ from the Americans of the past societies. Native Americans believed that the land was for the use of everyone in the village, and individual land ownership only applied to the crops that one grew. Native Americans believed that they should preserve the land for future generations. Private property and fenced-off locations like yards and forts are what you would call a white man invention. The idea of private property came over to the Americas when European countries expanded to grow their empires. So despite these shared beliefs, Native Americans in the North American continent were independent culture groups, did not form large empires like the Mesoamericans. So now we just covered some Native Americans and how they came over from Asia on the Bering Land Bridge. Next, we're going to be getting into the transatlantic travel.